Alô, boa noite, boa tarde a
Good
todos.
evening,
Mais uma
good
vez, desculpa o
afternoon.
atraso,
I'm
mas sem
sorry
mais
for the
delongas, eu
delay,
queria que acendesse a
but
luz, por
I
favor.
would like to switch
A
on
luz
the
aqui,
lights
por aqui.
now.
Obrigado.
Okay, thank
Eu
you.
vou chamar para falar
I'm going to call
receber vocês,
to
Laura
receive
Mourão, que é
you,
diretora-geral
Laura
da
Moran, General
Cinemateca Brasileira.
Director of the Brazilian Cinemateca.
Obrigada, Carlão.
Thank you, Carlão.
Bom, vocês não sabem
So,
o prazer
You
imenso
don't
que
know
dá
the
ver
huge pleasure
esta
it
sala
is to
lotada.
see this room filled up with people.
As boas-vindas
And
a
I would like
vocês
to
à
welcome
Cinemateca
all of
Brasileira.
you to the
E ver mais
Brazilian
uma vez uma edição da
Cinemateca,
ABC
Cinema
na
House,
Cinemateca
and
Brasileira,
see
porque a
one more
Cinemateca é a
version of
casa
the
da
ABC
ABC,
Week.
com
The
certeza, assim como é a casa
Cinemateca
de
is
todos
the
nós.
house of ABC Week, like it's
Eu
the house of
adoro
all
essa
of us.
Semana ABC.
I
Só
love
de
this
ver
week.
aquelas
Just
que eu
to,
chamo de traquitanas
see all
maravilhosas,
the wonderful
com as quais
things we
vocês
see
fazem
here
cinema,
and the
que eu
things
não
that you
faço
do,
mais.
what you used to do
Só tô
cinema
agora
with, right? To
dirigindo
move
aqui
movies with.
este
I
lugar
am,
da preservação,
I am,
da memória, do cinema e do
I am
audiovisual.
managing this
Lugar
area
muito
of
importante.
preservation of the cinema and the memory, the
Faz parte
Brazilian
da nossa
memory.
cultura,
It is
faz
part
parte
of our
da nossa
culture,
história,
our
e é
story,
fundamental
and it is
que
really
aqueles
critical for
que
those
já
that
são cineastas ou
are
aqueles
already film
jovens que ainda vão
directors or
ser,
youngsters that
estou
will
vendo aqui
become
vários
film
jovens,
directors.
não esqueçam da preservação.
Please don't forget
Não adianta fazer filme
preservation.
e não
It's no
preservar,
good
porque o
doing
filme
movies and not
desaparece.
preserve
Então,
them,
se
right?
vocês
Because they
querem ter
disappear.
trabalho
So
de vocês
if you want to
preservado,
have your
tem
work
que vir para a
preserved,
Cinemateca Brasileira.
come to the Brazilian Cinemateca.
Bom, ABC para
ABC
mim,
Week.
como eu disse, é
As I
algo,
said,
enfim, tem um carinho muito especial pela
I
ABC,
have
não
much
só pelo
love
que ela
for ABC
significa,
Week,
como
not only because of
a
what it
reunião dos
means to all
técnicos
of us, but the
especializados, os
meeting between
diretores
all
de todas as
the expert
áreas que se agrupam em
technicians,
torno
the
da ABC,
directors
mas
from
também
all
pelo
areas,
cuidado que a ABC tem
cinematographers
com o
that all
ensino,
meet,
com a
that all
formação
join
profissional.
here, and the
Isso eu acho
care that the ABC
importantíssimo,
Week has for the
porque se
professional
tem
training.
realizadores
Because
que
if
não
we,
fizeram,
if there are film
não
directors,
estudaram
right,
em
that did not
escolas,
study,
enfim, não fizeram
did not
nenhuma formação formal,
do not do any kind of
mas
formal training in
não são
filming.
muitos, não. Acho que
There are not a lot of
maioria
people. I think
passou
most people
pelo
did
ensino
go
de alguma
through
maneira.
some kind of
E eu
formal
também que venho
training.
de formação
And I myself,
em
for
escola de
example,
cinema,
I came from
eu
film school,
considero
right?
isso
And I
muito
consider
importante.
this most
E a
important.
ABC tem esse
ABC
papel também,
Week
que
has
é
this role
fundamental.
too, which is
Temos as
absolutely
escolas de
basic.
cinema,
We have
de vários
film
não
schools,
só as universitárias,
not only
as
universities,
técnicas,
but
em
technical
nível médio,
schools, mid-level
ABC está
schools,
fazendo parte
and
desse circuito
ABC,
de ensino, de
as it
formação
is part
profissional,
of this
é
professional
fundamental porque
training,
é um
it
lugar
is
onde
really
realmente estão
fundamental because this is
todos
the
aqueles
place where
profissionais que
all those
realmente se dedicam
professionals that
de
really
corpo e alma
dedicate
ao
themselves,
cinema e ao
fully
audiovisual.
dedicate themselves
Parabéns para a
to
ABC.
cinema and the
Aplausos
audiovisual
para ela
is
e bem-vindos
here,
mais uma
right?
vez à
So
Cinemateca.
congratulations and welcome. Congratulations to ABC Week and welcome once again to Cinemateca
Bom,
Week.
gente, a gente quer também
So
agradecer
now we
muito
would
à
also like to
Cinemateca,
thank the
a Sociedade
Cinemateca,
Amigos da Cinemateca. Eu vou falar rapidinho só para os nossos
Society
patrocinadores
Friend
e
of
apoiadores, que é a
Cinemateca.
Arca,
I'm
Não,
going to
Capital
tell us
Filmes, Nine Movie,
all of
SPCine,
our
Apture, Boston Post, Cineshop,
sponsors.
Dot,
I am
Elétrica,
mentioning the name of
Fábrica
all my
Brasileira de Imagens,
sponsors,
Light
right?
Motion, Local, Lumitec Foto, MCI Store, Nanlux, Next Move, O2 Pós, RBR Assistência,
So this
Sindicine, Sony,
is a list of all the
VideoX
sponsors
e
for the
SAIS.
week.
A maioria está
Most of
expondo aqui,
them
vocês estão
are
acompanhando. Por
exhibiting
favor,
here. They
prestigiem
have the
amanhã, depois da manhã.
exhibits, and you can
Rapidinho,
go
falar
to
que
the
nós estamos transmitindo
exhibition.
isso ao vivo
We
para o
are
YouTube.
transmitting this live
E,
via
por favor, sempre
YouTube.
que forem fazer uma
Every
pergunta,
time you
vão ter
want to
dois
ask your
monitores, um de cada
questions,
lado da
we will
sala.
have two
Peçam o
monitors on
microfone,
each
porque senão
side,
quem
two
está lá do outro
screens.
lado não vai
And
entender
please
absolutamente
ask
nada.
to be able to do
Pedir
it.
para quem
Otherwise,
estiver na mesa, por favor, se perguntarem
those
sem
that are on the
sem
panel
microfone, para
too,
vocês repetirem a pergunta.
they will ask you to repeat your
E no
questions
final
too.
da
And at the
mesa,
end
quem
of
estiver aqui
this
dentro, nós vamos sortear,
session,
fazer dois
those of
sorteios
you
de
that are here
brindes
are
dos
still
nossos
here. We're going to
patrocinadores,
have a
depois eu mostro,
draw
porque agora está muito tarde. Eu vou
from
passar
our,
para o Luiz, que vai
takeaways
apresentar a
from
mesa.
our
Muito obrigado,
sponsors.
gente. E desculpa o
So
atraso.
thank you very much, and I'm sorry for the delay.
Obrigado, Carlão.
Thank you,
Boa
Carlão.
tarde a todos os
Good
presentes e aos
afternoon,
que
everybody that
acompanham
is
virtualmente
here
também.
and those that are
Também
virtually
muito prazer em abrir a mesa de
watching
número
us.
2 da
It
Semana
is a
ABC
huge
2023
pleasure
e
to
agradecer
open
a todos
this,
que aceitaram
inaugurate
participar.
this
Vou
session.
apresentá-los.
I will
Nós
introduce
temos
all the
o
people
Philippe
here.
Corday, que
We
tá
have Philippe
na
Corday,
Suíça,
who is in
e
Switzerland,
é ele que vai
and he
abrir
is the one that's going to
comunicações de hoje,
start
né?
the presentations today.
Eu quero
And then
apresentar
afterwards, I
quem tá
would
na
like to
ponta
introduce
esquerda da
the
mesa, é a
person
Mari
to the left
que
is
é
Mari Correia.
cineasta
She's a film
e diretora
director,
do Instituto
and she's
Quatitu.
director of the
Aí à
Catitu
direita dela
Institute.
está o
To
César
her right,
Migliorin,
we have Cesar
professor da
Migliorin,
Universidade Federal
professor
Fluminense.
of the
À
Fluminense
direita,
Federal
Daniela
University.
Giovana,
Daniela
professora do
Giovana,
curso de audiovisual
professor
da Federal
of the
do Mato Grosso do Sul.
Audiovisual School
E ao meu
of
lado
the
direito aqui,
Federal University
o
of
Takuma
Minas,
Koikuro, cineasta indígena lá do
of
Chile.
Minas,
Ele vai trazer um pouco das
to Sul,
experiências.
Mato Grosso. And then
Então, a
we
ideia
have
dessa
also
mesa, assim,
Takuma
sendo muito breve,
Kuikuru
é
and Walter
uma
Lima
troca
Jr.
sobre
So the
ensino
idea
e
is to talk
aprendizagem.
about
Então,
audiovisual
por favor, podemos
teaching.
começar
Felipe,
com a sua
can
fala.
we begin
Muito obrigado.
with your presentation? Thank you very much. Philippe, you have the floor.
Hi there. Do you read me?
Yes.
Okay, hi. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation you gave me tonight, because it's like 8 p.m. now in Switzerland. Really happy to be part of this seminar. I take a great pride to explain the younger generation. So in the audience today, that education is something that we
Tá
can
baixo aqui.
bypass, be it in a film school, regular film school, or in other circumstances for the less people who the less have, like we used to say. So first of all, I'm a cinematographer. I've been working in my craft for 40 years right now. I went to classical courses as a camera assistant, grade
século XXI. Estamos prontos para preparar essa conferência.
We were asking ourselves how
Queríamos saber como ainda conseguimos ensinar essas habilidades, né, no cinema do século XXI. Eu faço trabalho voluntário, workshops, né, eu dou workshops durante esses festivais, trabalho voluntário, ensinando a geração mais jovem e professores, né, futuros. Então, esses são os lugares em que eu estive. Veja, Argélia, Mauritânia, Líbia. São pequenos países, né, que não têm acesso ao cinema ou a cursos de cinema. Então, o que eu quero dizer, em primeiro lugar, como diretor de fotografia, antigamente usávamos muitos equipamentos, né? Agora, minha ideia, quando eu vou a esses países, é usar recursos locais, disponíveis no local. Recursos locais, né? Que podem ser uma câmera pequena, refletores. Agora, o que eu faço quando eu vou para esses lugares, eu me certifico que as pessoas consigam ter as habilidades básicas, como manusear uma câmera, a exposição, o tamanho do plano, quer dizer, plano, perspectiva, enquadramentos, movimentos, diferentes atributos da iluminação, da luz, né? E também como gerenciar, ou como cuidar da equipe, né? Isso fica em vermelho, né? Isso bem em vermelho. Aqui, a equipe, cuidar da equipe é muito importante, porque mesmo se as pessoas estão trabalhando em projetos muito pequenos, ainda temos uma equipe que estão trabalhando juntos. E eu trabalho com habilidades de cinema, né? Eu também ensino isso, a cinema mais avançado. Primeiro, como colocar uma câmera adequadamente. Aqui nós estamos lidando com contraste, com pele mais escura. Eu faço toda uma entrevisto as pessoas, eu uso a iluminação natural, tipo sol, o reflexo, diferentes reflexos. E aí eu tento envolver os alunos aqui, que estão lá. E fazer sessões de perguntas e respostas para responder às suas perguntas e fazer com que eles começam a botar a mão na massa, né? Como eles começam a filmar com os recursos que eles têm. Então, geralmente, eu trabalho desta maneira. Temos 6 a 8 participantes. Esses participantes são profissionais. Eu estou ensinando essas habilidades mais avançadas, né? São diretores de fotografia. Então, eu faço um CV, isso, e depois nós temos uma sessão com eles. E aí, antes do workshop, eu tudo isso acontece através do Zoom, né? Antes do workshop presencialmente, nós temos uma sessões remotas via Zoom. Aí, porque eu quero que eles também se auto-ensinem, sejam autodidatas. Então, eu faço com que eles se perguntem, como que eu posso me ensinar isso, fazer isso? Aí, de repente, eles têm que apresentar documentos, alguns roteiros, escrever alguns documentos, algo do gênero. Então, quando eu vou no local, né, são 2 ou 3 semanas, ou até 2 meses depois dessas sessões pelo Zoom. Aí eu vou para os festivais, eu mostro os filmes, enfim. Daí eu vou para o workshop, que às vezes o workshop leva 10 a 15 dias. Primeiro, eu quero mostrar, ter certeza que as pessoas têm o conhecimento técnico, têm acesso, e depois nós montamos a câmera, toda a questão do mood, né, o ambiente, a lista de planos que nós vamos ter, e depois tem aquela coisa da gestão da equipe. A etiqueta, também é importante, etiqueta no set de filmagem. Depois desses 15 dias, esse curso, nós fazemos uma autoavaliação. Então, quais são os erros que cometemos, quais são as mudanças que podemos fazer e que fizemos, e quais são os resultados positivos e negativos. De fato, eu faço a mesma coisa que eu faço na escola de cinema, na escola de cinema em que eu ensino hoje, né? Então, para mim, é muito importante você chegar lá, passar a minha experiência com meus alunos, né? E depois voltar, quer dizer, passar a experiência que eu tive com meus alunos na Suíça, ir para a África e aí aprender com eles também e transmitir de volta esse ensino para os suíços, o que eu aprendi com os africanos para os suíços. Então, agora, eu falei muito sobre a questão, as partes técnicas. Não, agora vocês querem saber sobre o conteúdo, né? É uma coisa que nós queremos ter, conteúdo, certo? Então, Kinshasa, no Congo, é a escola de cinema Suka, 15 dias de treinamento. 15 dias básicos de treinamento, 4 dias de filmagem e 4 dias de edição ou montagem. Então, a ideia seria ensinar esses alunos de cinema de 20 a 30 anos de idade, sem nenhuma experiência em documentários, e poder treiná-los nessa experiência, né, de documentários. Daí tivemos essa ideia, né? Descobrimos que a melhor forma de fazer um documentário seria curtos, né? Curtas de 4 minutos, e o tema seria as pessoas da minha vizinhança, né? Da minha área. Então, vou mostrar o primeiro clipe para vocês. Não tem som, ok? Esse é o primeiro clipe que foi rodado em 2 dias. A história de um jovem. Isso foi rodado em Kinshasa, com uma pequena câmera, com som separado. E aí, isso foi depois de 20 dias de treinamento, ou de ensaios, né? Ou de estudo. Aqui, eles o que nós tínhamos. A ideia é fazer close, né? Esse pessoal, eles trabalham em televisão e eles trabalham como diretores de fotografia para comerciais. Então, esse foi o primeiro filme depois de 20 dias de estudo, de workshop. Agora, um mapa da África, eu vou mostrar. Eu estive na Mauritânia. Eu queria combinar fatos reais com ficção, ou seja, usar ficção para transmitir uma mensagem. Na Mauritânia, lá é uma sociedade muito fechada de muçulmanos. Eles são muito fechados, muito, então, isolados de certa forma. Ninguém consegue falar muito sobre cinema. Então, tivemos a ideia de usar locações reais, pessoas, de fato, vivendo as suas vidas reais, né? Então, eles reclamam que eles não têm acesso à água potável, né? Então, isso me deu a ideia de poder um documentário, quer dizer, fazer um documentário e devolver de volta, colocar isso num filme de ficção, né? Encenado por pessoas que reclamavam que não tinha água potável. Foram 2 semanas de pesquisa, reuniões via Zoom, etc. E daí eu viajei para lá em abril, tivemos 2 semanas de pesquisa, fizemos aquele trabalho bem jornalístico, né? Todos os dias, com o Jeep, indo de Jeep com os alunos, mandaram a fazer esse tipo de pesquisa jornalística mesmo. Qual é o problema? O que você quer? Como podemos ajudar vocês? Entrevistando as pessoas. Quando voltei para casa, tivemos um diretor local que podia nos ajudar a fazer tudo isso juntar. Em julho eu voltei. 2 semanas de pré-produção, de filmagem e pós-produção. E depois nós mostramos o filme no Lausanne Festival Focus.
E aqui vocês estão vendo algumas imagens, esses lugares onde foram feitas as locações. Vocês estão vendo uma imagem de uma mulher que está levando água de uma fonte. Vocês estão vendo que aqui é tudo bastante rústico, equipamentos bastante precários. Vocês estão vendo também esse filme que foi feito com absolutamente nenhum recurso avançado. Aqui vocês estão vendo um ótimo exemplo de que podemos trabalhar com recursos bastante precários. E também a montagem foi bastante difícil, porque não havia eletricidade no local. Então tivemos que fazer tudo isso em tendas. Havia areia e outros problemas, mas os resultados foram bastante satisfatórios. Agora o clipe 2, vocês vão ver aqui a filmagem. Vocês estão vendo um jovem que está vendo alguma coisa passar na televisão, que é uma mistura de ambientes. Ele está fazendo o papel dele mesmo e a mãe o papel dela mesma. Eles não têm água e vocês estão vendo a maneira que ela leva água para o seu filho. E o sonho deles, logicamente, é ter acesso à água potável de uma maneira mais tranquila, menos trabalhosa. Esses alunos meus, eles estão querendo mudar a sua realidade, transformar a sua realidade como se fosse um filme de Hollywood. Eles estão focando muito nesse sentido. Eu perguntei para eles como é que vocês aprenderam isso. Bom, nós assistimos os tutoriais no YouTube, a gente assiste o YouTube todo momento. Então, é uma maneira da gente aprender. Nada aqui é fake, nada é falso. Depois, finalmente, a história aconteceu assim. Todos podem ter acesso à água, e então ele funda uma sociedade da água, mas infelizmente a sua mãe ela tem não tem, infelizmente, acesso à água, porque ela não tem terra. A terra onde está a água não pertence a ela. Então, essa é a história que está atrás desse curta-metragem. Aqui outro lugar, o Ida, no Benin, não sei se vocês conhecem. No ano passado, eu fiz um treinamento para 8 diretores de fotografia, um curso básico, e aí nós queríamos levar adiante um festival de trailers em 10 dias. Nós fomos convidados para ensiná-los a fazer esse trailer. São 2 dias de um treinamento técnico, 2 dias de roteiro e depois mais alguns dias de pré-produção. Então aqui é uma mistura do making of e do que realmente foi o resultado. Eu não vou mostrar para vocês o trailer porque leva 6 minutos, é bastante longo para um trailer, mas nós tentamos de certa forma chegar e fazer esse trabalho sem grandes equipamentos. Vocês estão vendo aqui o que aconteceu. Nós viajamos muito na região, foi algo completamente improvisado. E os resultados foram bastante interessantes, eu devo dizer, porque foi um dia somente de treinamento no básico. Depois, no dia seguinte, eles tiveram que escrever o filme, lidar com toda a equipe técnica e, finalmente, eu deixei eles fazerem o que eles desejavam fazer. E é exatamente isso que eu faço com os meus alunos na Suíça. Eu quis que eles tivessem a mesma liberdade. Vocês estão vendo que existe uma estética específica. Eles estão trabalhando com comerciais e eles aprendem algumas habilidades mais avançadas que eles podem aplicar nesse trabalho novo para eles. E depois nós tivemos também a mesma estrutura, fazendo curtas, utilizando somente luz natural e um plano sequência. Isso tudo foi feito sem nenhuma luz extra, então nós tínhamos que reparar a câmera antes de fazer as filmagens. Eu tenho aqui um pequeno clipe que eu vou mostrar para vocês o resultado. O tema aqui é o dia de uma mulher. Ela está acordando, levantando e ela vai participar de uma sessão, uma coisa que ela não pode fazer no dia a dia. Nesse caso, não temos nenhuma luz extra, só temos luz natural. E nós tivemos que tentar fazer que diferentes tipos de formatos e cores aparecessem de maneira natural. Vocês estão vendo aqui, não há absolutamente nenhuma ajuda de uma luz extra, são só luzes naturais que vêm de fora. Eu tinha 6 alunos que tinham exatamente o mesmo tipo de ambiente. Eram atores não profissionais e todos tiveram a chance de fazer esse filme. Então, logicamente, se vocês quiserem ter acesso ao filme integral, a todo o filme, eu ficaria muito feliz de poder enviar para vocês, quem tiver interesse. É muito importante na hora de abordar os mais jovens, todos aqueles que estão na frente de um público, eles têm que ser, em primeiro lugar, criativos, depois ousados e sempre fazer tudo com uma visão diferente. Você não copia, você não imita ninguém. Você tem que trabalhar muito, você tem que fazer uma autoavaliação, você tem que comunicar e, finalmente, trabalhar junto. Também lutar pelas suas ideias, porque o filme é uma ferramenta fantástica para transmitir ideias em países onde isso não é possível. Você tem que assumir uma posição, você tem que ter o direito de dizer não, caso você não concorde. E também eu falo, nunca se rendam, porque se alguma coisa não funciona, você não pode largar. Você tem que aprender com seus erros e se divertir. Eu não sei se vocês conseguiram escutar em inglês. Eu não tenho feedback de ninguém. Eu espero que vocês tenham tido a oportunidade de escutar as minhas ideias e sem nenhum tipo de problema. Sim, Philip, yes. We heard you very well. No problem. Thank you.
Okay, fine.
Philip, muito obrigado por sua apresentação e mais tarde vamos ter uma sessão de perguntas e respostas. Mais uma vez, muitíssimo obrigado. I forgot to mention that Walter Lima Jr. that was going to be here on the panel. He may not be with us. He had a problem with his flight, but he may come later on. I'd like to pass the floor on to Giovanna. Daniela, Giovanna. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank Laura Escorel for the invitation and Luis for all the information and for being so kind to welcome me. I'm really glad to be here to look at this really diverse audience. I'd like to focus on 3 points that we have lived. I live in the state of Mato Grosso do Sul, and we have a school, audiovisual school there. There are 3 basic points that I want to focus my speech. I want also to approach the students, how they think and what they're doing there. Last year, I had this student that came up to me and he said, I'm open to deliver and to see if they surrender. This student was invited by a theater school where he studied when he was a teenager to begin at this audiovisual schools. There he would work with theater actors and also with peers. His name is Ara. Ara had studied a course which was called Education and Audiovisual Course. This is a mandatory school discipline, and they discuss the connection between cinema making, filmmaking, and education. So he would be using what he learned. This discipline or this subject matter is part of the audiovisual in the city, building knowledge based on images and sounds. And together with this discipline, filmmaking and education, new activities have been generated last semester. One of them was small workshops to introduce cinematography images. Students got together, they split into groups to study different subjects. They had small workshops for secondary students at Morininhas neighborhood in Campo Grande, that's the name of the city, and the secondary school had this subject in which the professor was working based on literature. He was interested in the books they were reading, and we did a kind of a partnership to show that beyond the topic, there is a way to tell the story by associating images, photography, sounds, and editing. The second activity within the subject with this extension project was a partnership that was done between the Federal University of Mato Grosso and the State University of Public Security of Mato Grosso do Sul. And this partnership had different sessions. It was a kind of a cinematheque that was going to be developed in a place called the Female Penal Center. It is a female prison penitentiary for open and semi-open regimes. They took turns in doing the shooting and also collecting information between them. And this penitentiary, curiously, is located across from the university. So on the one side, you have the rails or the fences that protect the prison, and across the street you have this prison in which we have developed these workshops. In one of the sessions that took place inside the female prison, we were able to show The Clown, a 2011 movie directed by Celto Melon. And one of the interns that was there, she was she was very close to the screen, and she was watching with the hands over her legs, and she was really focusing on what was going on the screen. When the film ended, she was the first one to say something, and this is what she said: if I had seen this movie before, I would not have to show The Lion King to my students. At that room there were 9 women, all of them Brazilian, between 25 and 60 years of age. None had seen this movie that was shown at television. The speech of this female inmate, marked all the students that were there shooting, and this developed into a new discussion the next day. Things that was discussed in the classroom. Among them, students said, I am studying to be able to produce Brazilian films for a population that is not familiar, has not even seen Brazilian films. And the second comment, this one coming specifically from a student, she said, I observed the emotion of these women, the joy of these women to talk about that movie, and I remembered that movie is also emotion. Sometimes I'm just concerned about the technical issues, but it reminded me that movie making is also emotion. So hopefully we think and focus on these small cinema schools. We want to work in a decentralized environment. Above all, the university students, we want them to have them all over the Brazilian territory, and we want to have students as elements to think about rooting the Brazilian cinema amongst our populations. These students are not only the holders of information, but we want them to be agents of their own training process. Perhaps inside the walls of the university this would not be possible, because there are people that are outside of the university. So I was thinking about a new proposal about decentralization and rooting up movie making across Brazil. I thought that this perspective is really strong. It can be a systematic and strong practice, because we have the universities, we have the students, inside universities. I'm talking about universities because this is where I am now. We have courses, different sorts of courses that work with audiovisuals as means as an end in order to think about this rooting element of Brazilian movie making. For me today to think about audiovisual teaching in a country like this, especially after 4 years of the previous governments, we have to think about how technical knowledge has been conveyed, but also to think about how the result of our practical work can reach the ones that have not been included in the inclusion process of cinema making in our own country. They were not included even making movies, producing movies, or even watching movies. And of course they have not basic training to do films. So the perspective of being together, perhaps we have to think of first what we're thinking about, how we are teaching, but above all to think broadly about our proposal of training these students to think broadly about how and what we teach, to think about values that should prevail among students, professors, in the case the population that sees the movies, to display a movie, to show a movie. In these conditions, this affects everyone, so it's difficult to say exactly who is the one who receives. All of them can be impacted when we see the sense of what we do and how we do it.
It is to think of this affective possibility, right, of being able to have a more abundant life, less scarce in its symbolic content and its material perspective, more abundance, less lack, from our perspective of seeing the world around us. Because in a more direct way, our population votes and our students will enter a production market. So you have a counterparty going beyond this utopic idea. Also, where you can return, where you can understand that there is a social life, right? The Brazilian population votes. Our students enter the labor market. So this example of this cinema club, and an example that happened from 2 students, an example of a scientific theory where we discussed the final work of these students. We wanted to understand how to do it, what are the conditions that they found to do, that they had to do what they wanted to do. They entered a civil society organization in Campo Grande, which is called Visual Field Collegiate. There is a seat here with the public branch so that they could talk about culture, right, and how to deal with the culture in the government and the local government. And for you to have an idea, these students took the proposal to build cinema clubs. They like cinema clubs. They have their own cinema club in the city, and they were concerned to know how to allow films to get there, because it was part of some people from the inland São Paulo went to study there, and they saw that they don't get to São Paulo, there to Campo Grande, like São Paulo. Campo Grande suffers with distribution of, national films, right? Matinee, the film which was nominated for the Oscar, and it was a film by a former student in Belo Horizonte. So these are people that are there making film, right? And this film didn't get there to Campo Grande. And so that the students took to the collegiate resulted in public notices this year, the possibility possibility of having part of the budget for the formation of cinema clubs, right? So there they have a possibility of having more cinema clubs. So you have this movement of going out of the university. And the last point, just to get to the end of my presentation here, my speech, we have a discipline which is the history of cinema and the Brazilian audiovisual. Here it covers the history of Brazilian film all the way to the end of the 50s. And this becomes, it becomes notorious, right? Just how little we know about our cinema in Brazil. Above all, our older cinema, you know, if we want to locate it in time. The cinema that has been there for more time in the past. So it shows a film of the 30s, and this semester a student said this film in Brazil in the beginning of the 30s, I could never conceive that a film like this is in a place managed by Brazilian Cinemateca in the internet, which is BCC, Cultural Content Bank, right? You will be able to see this film called Limite, which is limit, and this was a film that was done in the 30s, and also another film from 45, and they're just amazed. The semester, a student took the film for the family to watch, and the father said he missed film like this. So here we also discussed a text by Paulo Emílio Salles Gomes. And then a student asked another student to stand up and said, turn your back so that the person can see, the teacher can see your T-shirt. And he said, this shirt, we chose to do this T-shirt, and we put Kill Bill from Tarantino. And his conclusion at the end is a foreign film. So he came to the conclusion, you know, the idea of Brazilian film, how it was in their lives now, right? And as a last example, to think of a current perspective, learning a relationship, right, goes through the need to have a meeting, to do with this population that is historically excluded from the possibility of doing this, which is Brazilian cinema. And wherever this population is, in a prison, in a community, in a reference center of the population of the homeless, to think of people on the streets, right? How we can go, we can use the movies for this, and what we can do for them, movies. And this, and we're going to have to do together, to extend our possibilities, to learn together with the movies. Everything that the cinema has to tell us, right? And I think it's going to be important to do, having the Brazilian cinema as the main tool, that will allow for us to look, to think what we do, how we do, in order to be able to reflect with regards to what we do, so that our films can continue being produced, being preserved, and this is very important. They can also reach the population so that they can see these films. There are a huge amount of people that can learn with the Brazilian cinema, and this is an important point for us. It's not to reinvent the wheel. We already do a lot, right? So from now on, we are already doing a lot. Let's think of this more systemic thing, so that this can become bigger among us, right? So that we can get close to this. And to conclude again, we, each one of the professionals in this area, above all professors, can promote an internal displacement. Perhaps we're going to spend more time here working, this perspective of being able to displace, to leave our comfort zone and find all these other people that can be part of this broader dynamics of a cinema specifically a cinema that is Brazilian.
Obrigada,
Thank
gente.
you very much.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you
professora
very
Daniela.
much, Daniela. Now I will give the floor
Kuikuro.
to
Kuikuro.
Kuikuro, Takuman Kuikuro, film director.
Boa tarde.
Good afternoon.
Pegite-quatsa. Itainho Daco. Iha. Cinema Tucana.
He is speaking in the indigenous language,
Então, boa
in a
tarde
dialect, so I couldn't translate. My name is Takuman Kuikuro. I am from Xingu region, and I'm very happy to be here with you. And thank you very much for the invitation for ABC Week 2023. This is a year of happiness for the indigenous peoples, for our conquest, the things we were able to accomplish, right? We have the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples with Lula, and this is reason for huge happiness. And so, to tell you a little bit about my experience with the indigenous people's audiovisual in my village, where I learned, where I studied, and where I grew up, watching, how to make movies, how to film, how to operate a camera, handle a camera, how to set up a tripod, and how not to work with a tripod too. So, and at my, when I began in my village, and when I began to work with movies, I didn't even speak Portuguese, right? I learned to speak Portuguese doing movies, making movies. And Mario Correa is here with me, Mari Correa, and she's proof of this, because I learned with her during we have a cinema school for indigenous peoples, where several indigenous peoples learn to make movies there. And I'm one of these people. And this, for us, it was pure novelty to work with movies, to get a camera in the tribe or in the village. And today, I am here telling you about this. So I thank you for the opportunity of being here and to be able to talk about my experience as a student of this school, the cinema school, and also another cinema school in Rio de Janeiro, where I went to be able to understand how I could produce my own movies, my own films. In the village, it had to do with the identity of the people there. The spirit of the person you're capturing through the cinema. The spirit of the people. This is where we register our own culture. Originally, we are increasingly occupying these places. We have indigenous screenplay writers and filmmakers, and indigenous people conquering their space in the movie market, in the cinema market. Specifically now, we have a woman called Graciela Guarani, who directed the second season of invisible city in Netflix. So this is a conquest, it's an accomplishment for indigenous people that are increasingly occupying this space so that we can make movies, produce more movies in the villages and out of the villages. Myself, since I consider myself a film director. I am a film director, not an indigenous film director. I'm a film director that can work with several cultures, not only just one culture, my culture. And today, we are occupying increasingly this. We are sort of like, we are getting, we're setting our place on the screen. São Paulo and indigenous tribes. So we are occupying this space, so that we can show the culture of indigenous people, so that we can show our culture done by the indigenous people. So it's important. So because before we didn't know this, and today we do, we know this audiovisual tool where we can do our own culture, where we can show our culture and we can show exactly what's happening in our tribes, right, in our villages. A cinema tool that is very important for us, and where we can document and denounce, what's happening in our tribes, in our villages. We transform the lens, an audio-visual lens, into a tool to fight with, our bow and arrow. And today, indigenous communicators, we consider them as communicators of the forest, to show where we are. We are delimiting and monitoring our lands through the audiovisual. Audiovisual is a tool where we can show what is happening, in fact. And there are 3 types of areas we're working with here. Film directors, communicators in the villages and tribes. And an example, today we have the indigenous media. This is where we're working all over Brazil, so that we can ourselves register our struggle. And recently, a recent example that happened last month, all the communicators, indigenous communicators and film directors occupying a place, right, where we're discussing this, so how they can insert themselves so that they can, each one of the peoples, indigenous peoples or tribes, have their film directors, audiovisual in their tribes, right, to portray their tribes. And personally, we have a lot of difficulties to know how to distribute our films, right? The difficulties we have to register this in Ensino, which is our film agency, and how we can work, what language we're going to work with, how we can work with this, because we see a lot of films done by non-indigenous peoples about the indigenous people. And it circulates more than the films that are made by indigenous people. So, for example, there's a film called Fever, and there is another film called Territory that was nominated for the Oscar. I don't know if it in fact was nominated, but anyways, one day I want ourselves, us, to have these films in this Netflix platform. Other type of media. And I decided last year to a place where we can, to be able to teach indigenous film directors and have their work. And to do this, I created the first festival of cinema and indigenous culture, where we can compete with indigenous film directors, films done by the film directors. And we created this so that this can happen as it happens here in Brazil, right? Like in the Brasília Festival, the festival in São Paulo and in Rio. So I want indigenous films to enter these these festivals and the commercial circuit. And for this, we're teaching how we can have this in a platform too, right? Because our films, we compete with you in a way, right? And this is our struggle. We're teaching people there, the right, authors' rights, and how we can take results of our work to our community. And this is what we're struggling for. And this is what we're teaching in the villages, how to make movies, right? How we can produce our own films, how we can create our films in the villages, what way we're going to work with. Are we going to work with documentaries, or are we going to work with ethno-fiction in our villages? Because every time you see films done by indigenous people, there is a document. We're not working with fiction. We're working with using the cinematographic language, right? So how can we can conquer the people through our films? How can we attract people that do not know our story, our history? And this is what we're thinking about and teaching people. But it is increasingly difficult because for us to work with movies in the village, we have to have a lot of training. We have to train a lot of people so that they can better understand how we can produce our films together with our communities.
And last year, I created the first indigenous film festival and a kind of a place to show the movies, where I take movies produced by cinema professionals, not only movies made by indigenous population, but also non-indigenous. We wanted to learn with the non-indigenous views inside the tribes. By doing this, I believe we can understand that non-indigenous are producing movies within the big cities, but also in the tribes. So how to produce our films inside the tribes? That would be the basic result. As I said, audiovisuals became very important within indigenous communities today, a tool for struggling, for fighting, where we can safeguard our culture by using the tool of cinema making, cinema being the identity of the people. Thank you. Thank you very much, Takuma. I'd like to welcome now Walter Junior, movie maker and professor. Walter, I had set you apart to be the last one to speak, so you came in just in time. Very good. It's good to have you here with us.
Então, seguindo a nossa ordem,
Now,
eu vou passar a palavra para
I'm going to pass the floor to Mari Correa. If we're following the order of presenters that we were given. So Mari Correa, a filmmaker and director of Catitu Institute. Hello everyone, good afternoon. My name is Mari Correa. I am a filmmaker, documentary maker, and director of the Catitu Institute. It's good to speak right after Takuma. I am very happy to be here in this panel among such distinguished filmmakers and also friends of mine. I'm going to be focusing on the present, but before I do that, I'd like to say a little bit about the history of indigenous movie making. When we began training indigenous filmmakers, we did it based on an experience that I brought from previous experiences I had outside of Brazil, which is called Atelier Valro in Paris, which was created by a group of filmmakers, among them Jean Rouch, who is an important filmmaker and marked a whole generation and my training as well. At this atelier, we learned how to do movie making and movie documentaries by doing. So it was a process of learning by doing. It was a collective experience, a group of around 20 people, and at that time it was just the beginning of video making. It was a kind of hybrid. There was many things in films, but there was video as well, which democratized the art. Many people could do it. It had a democratizing effect, and Atelier Valro worked with populations that lived on the outskirts of the city. So it was hands-on movie making. We would watch different movies, and we experimented with different techniques. We had our teachers and professors. We discussed ethics and the place of the documentary maker as regards the people that we film, how this relationship was seen in that environment. There were some dogmas at the atelier. When we were doing our training, we could not use voice-off narratives. There was no such thing as external voices outside of images. The sound had to be direct. By one side, this was really healthy, because this thing of being able to use or not to use certain things makes you more flexible. You have to fit whatever you have to do. At the time, it was 16 millimeters. We had not much film to use, so we had to think before doing, before producing. It was experience-based learning. So I did this training, I became a filmmaker, and I began working as an audiovisual professor at this atelier. And once I was invited to go as a professor, I don't like the idea of, or the word professor. I was rather an instructor. I was invited to be an instructor at New Caledonia, which is considered French territory by the French, where original peoples, indigenous people, Kanaki, lives. We had 6 people altogether, myself Brazilian, and we had another person from Papua New Guinea. As we got there, we worked with a group of 20 youngsters. Well, there were young people and not so young people, 30-something. They lived in that region, Kanaki, which was on the northern part of the island. There was a lot of discrimination, and I would go as far as to say racism towards them. And there was this distance between the young people and the elderly. The elderly were the ones who held the most traditional learnings, and the young people had different references. And the young people would complain that the elderly were not interested in telling their stories, and vice versa. The elderly complaining about the young people, that saying that they didn't want to hear their stories. So there was a kind of weakening in terms of transmitting knowledge. They are peoples of oral traditions. The learning is conveyed orally. By working with these young people, they began interviewing and shooting within their own communities, and there they collected the testimonies of the elderly. And by talking and being closer to the elderly, this all rekindled the interest of the elderly, because the camera was targeting them, was focusing on them, and they got really excited and began telling their stories, and a lot of moving stories came out. There was this gentleman, senior gentleman, and he was telling his stories, and he got more and more excited as time went by. And one day, he was being shot. He goes to this place, and he grabs a kind of a plastic bag, and nobody knew what it was there. It was really dusty, but inside there, that was what they used as coins, traditionally a time that was gone. And this moved everybody that was there. It was amazing to see how interested these people were in some kind of old techniques and old forms of living, and the camera showed everything. And this parallels to the indigenous peoples here in Brazil. I did my first shooting between 82 and 86. I worked with the Xingu people, and I said, I want to do this in Brazil. I understand that this weakening of oral traditions was also taking place here in Brazil, and how to act. And it was amazing, the results that we achieved. Takuma, that was incredible, isn't it? How the elderly get excited, how they feel some pleasure to participate, because when you work with indigenous peoples, you work constantly with the idea of community. The idea of the individual filmmaker is something that emerges, but in order to get there, you need a sense or the help of the community. When you film the community, they work together. They are relatives and friends, and there are a series of questions that emerge that are not part of our universe. When Takuma talked about spirits, it came up to me a story just to give you a little bit of the sense of what this process, or the visual process, means in these communities. We had trained some filmmakers at the tribe, and there was this ritual called moivu, or munhó rather, that takes place from time to time. Is a ritual that takes months. There is a part of this ritual where there's the presence of several spiritual entities that they're not so nice. They don't like children, for example. One of the filmmakers, Caraná, had this newborn baby. And the old people got together to discuss whether they could shoot it or not, because that environment was dangerous to children, small children. And they would ask children to stay home. They were not supposed to be there playing around because it was dangerous. At that time, he was shooting, and at the same time, shooting could be bad for their children, even if they were not around. There could be a bad omen from those spirits. So this was a topic of debate later on. At that time, the oldest member of the tribe said, well, that guy who is holding the camera can shoot because nothing is going to happen to his son because he is the one who's shooting. So there are other issues and questions that arise when you're filming in an indigenous community. It's not just how to set the camera. There are other questions. Who am I going to talk to? What questions and issues I have to resolve? So we have to think with a different mind. To teach in this environment is something really delicate. And what do we teach, after all? So what kind of mindset I need to have in order not to propose a formatted language? You come with that, your structure, your culture, your tastes, your preferences. You have to let them know very clearly that this is something that's yours. Otherwise, it seems that they have to do it that way. And this, for me, is the problem of film schools, because sometimes they are too structured. The dynamics of learning inside your own community is quite different, because you're there learning to relate to your relatives in a different way through a camera, which has nothing to do with a relationship without a camera. You also have to negotiate different aspects of filmmaking. I remember that when Tecumã was there to shoot the accounts and all the relationships of the people with their own rituals, how they could be shot. There are several kinds of thinking and reflections that you have to take into account. And this does not involve only techniques and how a movie is produced. So going beyond the indigenous universe, I believe that this happens in different kinds of situations. It's a constant exchanging. It's not only one way. I believe we also learn a lot. I learned a lot by translating. By editing, we needed to know what was being said, so we have to be a kind of informal translators. And in the process of translating, we learn a lot from these cultures. So I just wanted to put this experience that I had as a audiovisual training I have to tell you that challenges are really different, and also images. I remember that from the beginning, and I believe this is still makes sense, but at that time when we first began, and this goes back 30 years ago, we had from the elderly, from the chiefs of the tribes, the understanding that that was really important, that the children or the youngsters learn how to use the camera and know how to film, because they wanted to show the non-indigenous who they were, but with their own point of view and not somebody else's, not how people from outside have filmed them, use a voiceover and go away. They had this view that audiovisuals were a political strategy for visibility, to make those tribes visible. And the other component of the story was to film inside, if you will, a sense of loss. When I mentioned in the beginning the weakening of the cultural life and some of the cultural practices. And there, the audiovisual was there to safeguard, to keep whatever was being lost and being weakened. So there was also these two sides. We wanted to show it inside and take it outside, and it's not the same kind of a material that is kept inside and that is taken outside. There is also this thing about preserving the culture and communicating with the outside world that I believe is really important. Now, I'm going to tell you what I do today. When I left this studio, I decided to create this Cachitu institution, which aimed to work with female indigenous. At that time, there was just one female filmmaker, Indian filmmaker, the first filmmaker that we know of who was of indigenous origin. And she was very bold, I would say. When she first started at 12 years of age, it was a boy thing, not a girl thing. So when we created a clip for women at the Cachitu institution, that was our major challenge. Let's try to bring in the female filmmakers to give them opportunities to express themselves through the camera. So we wondered what kind of strategy are we to use, how to attract these women. So we decided to have workshops directed exclusively for women. At that time, I saw that they were kind of embarrassed to learn together with boys. So what if we have a female environment? They will feel more at ease and do their stuff.
And so I proposed this to the women leaders group in Xingu, who loved the idea immediately. So we got to a moment that we were supposed to get to, because there was, I had already coexisted with other peoples, indigenous peoples in the Xingu region. I had never had a demand from women. Everybody said, Mara, we also want to do this. It is the coexistence where you begin to feel that women, you know, the mood in the area, women were changing, they wanted to occupy new areas, and this worked. The idea of having these exclusive workshops for women. And another issue was to have the older women, to demystify the idea that one has to be young to do a movie, to make a move. Older people, they have a lot of story to tell, so why not behind the cameras? So we began to create women, different groups, right? Women from 15 to 16 all the way to 70. And this was just great to have this exchange of ideas, exchange of experience and generations, right? Our first experiencing, it was in a Kaoli, the people's community. The main leadership there, she was my partner here when we began with the audiovisual training there. And she's the person that directed the first audiovisual experience for the women, which was a short film they did during the workshop, which was the story of the monkey and the cuchilla. And it was a very transgressive film because it tells the story of a couple of cuchillas and so this animal betrays him, right, with a monkey, right? And so this was kind of the story. And so it was a woman, it was a cuchilla, this animal, betraying, right, or cheating on her husband, the male animal, right? So there were funny things, right? They chose the casting, right? They chose this leader, this older woman. I am 60, so she's about my age too. But at the time, she was a great-grandmother, and she chose her daughter-in-law to be the cheater on her husband, right? Which is so she becomes pregnant. So you have these indigenous peoples, women that, they had to find a way of making her pregnant stomach, And weeks later, I received a call from her saying she was really pregnant. And it became a joke, right? Because she was pregnant from a monkey, because the cuchilla is a Brazilian animal. So, and she cheated him with a monkey. So there are film directors that have histories, that have journeys that didn't go through the Cachitu. And we give a lot of emphasis to the process of creation. The process of this workshop is even more important than the product, the results from here. So it's really, really great to have the end of the process. But the process is so fantastic. So they also express themselves via this audiovisual tool. And it is very empowering, right? And it's true. Because they acquire a lot of self-confidence, self-esteem. This is very visible, the change that this brings about to them, the possibility of being able to express themselves via the audiovisual. And so this begins in 2009 with the women, and this year, last week, we just created the Indigenous Women's Audiovisual Network called Kata Meeting. So we began mapping things to discover how many Indigenous women have experience with audiovisual. Not film directors that have the experience, that's all. So we began to go after them through partners, people we knew and friends. We asked everybody, and now we have 74 women. And they're not, these are not film directors, right? These are 74 women that had some kind of experience with audiovisual. So why is this good for? We believe that the problem, the difficulty of doing what Takuma is saying, being able to insert yourself in the market, penetrate the market, have access to foment is through visibility, showing these people that are doing this. So when we discovered, everybody was just amazed, right? We have 74. We perhaps have even more people. We're still looking for people there. But still, 74 women is a lot. So it's already a collective, right? So why do this? So that it is part of a statistics. Because for Ensino, there are no numbers. The indigenous cinema, we don't exactly know how many people, in fact, are in this audiovisual creation universe, right? But we know how many people. And this gives us the strength. Once we create all these people to go after the cultural policies, public policies to foment the indigenous cinema. Public notices adapted to the indigenous language. We who produce films, we are an NGO. We don't have access to these public notices via Ensino, which is our film agency, public agency, because we are an NGO. So there are a series of problems, and this has to go through public policies, right? In partnership with our film directors, men and women film directors. So for us, it is very important to create these partnerships, to have these allies, because we're here in an ABC Week event. So how can we talk with the ABC? How can it help, collaborate with all of these issues of the indigenous film? Because everything is missing, right? Distribution, production, everything. So when I was talking before we began here, they are concerned, for example, we want film, a production designer, we want, an editor, we want a film director. We have to have this understanding. In order for the indigenous films to exist and occupy new spaces, it needs to have partnerships. The cinema world has also to look at them and say, look, what can we offer you? What can we articulate here to make this happen? And just to conclude my presentation, so you have to think, see, and see how to be able to articulate with the indigenous cinema, look at the women's network. They want to be a point of reference, right? A benchmark. They want to be a point of reference of those that are interested, are curious, want to study, want to know diversity of this indigenous universe through the eyes of indigenous women. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mari. I'd like to remind you that this story, you can see it in the YouTube, this film that you mentioned about the agouti and the monkey. Now I will give the floor to César Migliorin. It is a pleasure to be here in the Cinematheque. Friends, people to be with friends and people I really admire. I was listening to Taku Kwikuru. He made a wonderful film called Hyperwomen. And when you talk about the story of being a film director, it's not only an indigenous film director. For example, I was writing about this film, and then after talking with him, I asked him, Takuma, what's your next project? And in my biasness, I thought he was going to say something about culture, and he said, no, I want to make a film with Selton Mello, which is a very famous Brazilian actor. Selton Mello, Wagner Moro, and I loved that. I loved this, this kind of displacement. I also believed that, an indigenous film director is going to work and make films in his tribe, right? So I would like to somehow share with you
que está ligado à educação, apesar de eu ser
work that is linked to education. Although I'm a professor at university in a film course, I would like to talk about a way of thinking of movies and spaces where cinema is not the main focus. When the cinema, for example, goes to schools, to hospitals, to a mental health clinic, a sanatorium, it gets there not necessarily to train film directors or to learn with movies in itself, but also because cinema has invented in these hundreds of years a way of thinking, a way of seeing the world, of having an experience about the world. And this way of relating with signs, for example, this way of experimenting things. Cinema is very specific. It's as though we could come closer to these inventions of the film to apply and invent with our lives, use our lives to invent. So the cinema can tell stories, but we can also think that cinema
vou dar nome estranho, mas assim, agenciamento de signos.
It's a kind of agent of signs, okay? I live in Rio. I left Rio this morning. I put my alarm clock. When it rang, I noticed it was raining. And so I look at the temperature in São Paulo. Did I need to use a jacket? And I took a taxi and was playing some kind of evangelic song. All of these are signs. It's as though we are in a sea full of signs, and we have to navigate in this. So I arrived here, there was music, there was screen, I saw your T-shirts. SEAP was written, and I wanted to know what SEAP is. You're kind of navigating in signs. This navigation, we have strategies to let it go. Because if you're before each sign and you stop, what does SEAP mean? I will do nothing else. I'll stop speaking. I'll be completely immobilized. Godard has a film with a fantastic character where they're going to rob a bank. And there is a guy there. Everybody in the group says, this guy is really dumb. He's really stupid. He has to do the simplest of things, right? And so he had to find a bomb. So he had to put the bomb in front of the door of the bank and just leave running. But he puts the bomb, and when he leaves running, according to the guy that tells the story of the film, he has the first thought in his life. How can one foot go after the other? One foot go after the other. And he's completely paralyzed then. So vis-a-vis this thought that takes him, consumes him, and he's paralyzed, and he cannot leave the bomb anymore, and it explodes, and he dies. So thoughts are very, very, it's blasted, so it dies. So we have strategies to cross like a dart everything we see, all of these signs all around us. And of course, today with our mobiles, we might be, fully immersed in this, right? And I arrived early here in São Paulo, and I walked from the airport. It was just fantastic, full of things before me. I was going up. I walked, right, from the airport. I was going up Alameda Yambiquara, and I loved it. I said, São Paulo has this Alameda, which is this street, which is called Yambiquara, which was a very important Indian tribe. So these are signs, right? The signs can take us. So what is movies? Cinema. The cinema invented incredible forms of being able to deal with these signs, because sometimes it's excessive, it grew too much, and sometimes we have to screen things, to filter things. I can receive all of them, or I'm going to be completely suffocated. I'm not going to be able to breathe with so many signs, so I'll be so concentrated in one only, and then you die, right? So cinema, there are two things that help us to notice and to understand how to navigate in this forest of signs, which is life. Life is a navigation of signs, the forest of signs. So the first thing really emerged here. It's a certain question. What the cinema does and who does it? So why? Because traditionally, in the history of cinema was a huge structure, very hierarchical. Have you ever been in a huge set? It's very hierarchical, right? Many big structures, streets are blocked. So these workers, they are workers. Sometimes you might be in an industry or a company, right? They're very few, they're in a very creative place. However, here, in this, with this amount, 74 women, indigenous film directors, right? It is a mapping of somebody that's creating a cinema that is so huge, we just can't deal with it. So the people that are making cinema, making movies, it's important to stop here to think. Everybody here films, but very few of us, in fact, have a plan. Perhaps when you put the camera in the horizontal, or when you spend 1 minute filming, you establish another relationship between the camera and the reality. So two ways. One, what cinema does and who does it? So some kind of learning or some kind of experience in this forest of signs, this sea of signs. And when one does this, when one films, when one edits to decide what's going to stay, what is the pace, what you have to listen to, is the same. It's the same as being fed with a new experience with reality. It's as though we could, in these environments where cinema is not the central focus, to think cinema is a way to invent modes of experience, either with the family, with history, with memory. And the other thing is to find means to walk around these signs.
The other way would be to see how movie making invents new ways of approaching, of editing, of transforming that is not part of reality. The movie Hyper Women, these directors redo a party that was not played out. In 30 years' time, they redo this party. How to do that? Well, they have to go and listen to these people and see how this party was at that time. Walter has a wonderful movie called Brazil 2000. There is a scene in which shows family after a nuclear war. So this family is on a road in which the lady is pulling this furniture that holds glasses, an old kind of furniture. So it was a mixing of a Third World War, nuclear war, and old furniture. So movie making gives us this possibility of moving around this crazy environment, but at the same time prepares us in order not to cross this forest like an arrow. Otherwise, I would just go from here to another point with my head down, and I simply cross the jungle or the forest. Well, this is what I had to say. Thank you. Thank you. This is the idea I wanted to be. Well, but since I have a little more time, everything I'm talking about movie making has to do with creative processes. Living or creating a movie has to do with creation. Movie making can, or living can make movies, can update movies, but it can also modernize the way I relate to my neighbors, my neighborhood, and my family. So I say that movie making gives us tools to enter this process of creation. It is to have a relationship with creation itself, and creation has a name, life. So this is what movie making offers us, and we should not lose focus, whatever we are. Well, this is now my final words. Thank you.
Obrigado, César.
Thank you very much, César.
Passando a palavra para o
Now
Walter.
I'll pass the floor to Walter.
Na verdade, a gente até começou bem atrasado.
Well, we had this delay in this panel. We're going to have more time than firstly scheduled for Q&A. So please feel at ease, take your time. You don't need to rush. Well, I heard Takuman, and I understood that he has a process that is known through others, and I was really curious to know and meet him personally, and here it is. When I got into this other term, he was saying words, and everything that he was saying had to do a lot with myself when I was younger doing movies. He said he didn't want to win over a space. It was necessary to have a market of exchanges. I still firmly believe in these ideas. We have not changed a bit. We are still just like that. And I expect you to agree with me later on. Nothing has not much changed. So what we wanted is to have movies to give us a face. It took a year to have this movie making, giving a face to that movie making, which we call new cinema. We really wanted to make movies. When movies were created, when they began, it was really interesting the way they were created. The first time, the inventor of the cinema, which was just images, to have an image move by repetition. That was the basic idea. So when he first displayed these images in a room, it was a train station. People just left scared because they thought the train was getting into that room. So the closeness to reality was seen right in the first film ever. So it was interesting to see that his invention was shown later on in amusement parks. So first in little machines that you would show picture after picture, and horses would move and people would walk. And this was just beside the steering wheel, the other attractions. It was something really popular. This popular route of movie making is in the essence of the possibility of communicating with a lot of people in different environments, regardless of social classes. And at a certain point, when movie making was developing, it enchanted everyone, and then it multiplied and was pervasive all over the world. But in the beginning, movies were silent, even though they were present in any and all cultural spaces. There was no need for speeches, for music. It was a kind of utopia that through a form of expressions we would reach out to any culture. Perhaps this, in essence, is what cinema or movie making should be. Perhaps it's not, but it should be. At the same time, there is a language code that was established so that people would understand. If you take out the subtitles, we would understand the movies all the same. Perhaps not all nuances, but they will get the grab of the stories by just watching the images. What struck me when he was talking about this struggle has to do with identity, something that we still struggle for. I understand that this space, this area is totally occupied, and the most interesting thing is to struggle for a space. It is a constant battle, which is not only in a small niche of some Brazilians wanting to do movies. In any niche that there are present, there are people trying to express their thoughts and feelings, and this is wonderful to see. I heard you speaking, and it really moved me, because that's the way I think. It's the essence of what we do and why we do it. And then the next speaker talks about approximately the same thing, basically the same thing. Why do I do that? Well, to communicate to other people, to reach out to others. That old piece of furniture that would hold crystal glasses was part of the family's memory, which of course will be broken by the end of the journey. We create forms, images, and signs, metaphors, and other things depending on the time we live, especially political moment we're undergoing. I believe that this moment for you, indigenous movie makers or filmmakers, is a special moment, a moment of refining and confirming what we are and what we think about the use of this art, of this expression. I sometimes wonder, when you were in the middle of your presentation, is it only documentary films that are coming from indigenous people? No, not at all. There is still a lot to be shown or to be said. What can this do to our feelings? I wonder what kind of movies they are going to be. I did some documentary films for TV, about specifically about 2 Indian tribes. And one of them really struck me, especially when one indigenous person began telling a story, and the story he was telling was an adventure full of risks. And he would tell the story in such a way that was really scaring for me. He would stress some aspects. He would bring it in. He would challenge people to participate in his story just by using his language, the way he knows how to express the oral culture, the richness of the culture, the sounds he could emit to provoke our inner feelings. So that really impressed me. He using images that he knew of. I believe this possibility of being able to really touch the audience, how to enchant the audience, how to draw the audience attention to his or her movie, a movie that represents them. How will this happen? This is a challenge in itself. Perhaps a new vocabulary should be invented to translate all that with subtleties. Perhaps we don't know about them yet, but it's up to you to set it up. Us somehow have reproduced things that in a prevailing culture, the prevailing culture imposes us to do. We constantly see that, and somehow we keep it for us as our own vocabulary. You have a wonderful opportunity to invent new things. So it is really touching to see that this movie can exist in its own originality, being its own creation. So it's wonderful to have movie theaters where movies from all parts of the world can be seen. It's always good to see what others around the world have invented and really take possession of all these ideas. It's not one specific culture. Movie making encompasses universal ideas. What brought me here really was a curiosity. What am I going to do in this panel where you have this filmmaker, the other filmmaker, we have the interest of this audience, mostly youngsters. What am I to see? Myself and my movies. Perhaps the only thing that comes to mind after an odyssey trying to get here today is that you gave me the tools for my speech, which is something else. You gave me, you fed me with your ideas. The thing about movie making, well, one of the things that really thrills me in movie making is that movie making is a collective art. All my training was always to understand that movie making was the art of one person. This is not true. Movie making is a collective art of the team that produces this art, and this empathy and this sharing. It's beautiful that it is this way. Lately, sometimes when I have the opportunity to assess or evaluate what I have done my work. I don't like to do that so much, but sometimes I do this assessment, and a question comes back to me all the time. How did I do this idea? There's always somebody else, an actor, a cameraman, or somebody else. It was not only myself, there were always other people involved. And this is something that helps me do it again, or feeds my wish and my will to do it again, because we're always sharing with others. I feel this really strongly. And I believe that when we have this collective understanding of a people, when we were first beginning to do this new cinema, we wanted to express the total feelings of a people, everybody joining forces to do something that would be seen and would be necessary for others. This is something that creates different ideas. And I was just wondering where movie making is heading. Lately, you have seen a lot of Brazilian movies. I myself have seen a lot of Brazilian movies. When I first began as a movie maker, there was a kind of a project of one kind of cinema. Today, there are several ways to do movies. Perhaps it is the most reasonable modus operandi. Many people expressing different ways in a multi-shaped country and multicultural country as Brazil. Of course, there are things that are dispensable. I believe when we think about the market, we sometimes go nowhere. We reach no end. I feel this when I think about Brazilian movies. I believe there is a lack of interest on identity. And this is prevailed. There is a need of using cinema as identity, as a fingerprint of who we are. This is what we are. Somehow we are just trying to take to the world an image that they expect from us. They know how this is done. We want to get an Oscar. This is a little bit of what we do without getting into any fight with or playing with you. We want to film with Celton Mello, an actor famous in Brazil, or even Leo DiCaprio. We want to get out of being anonymous and reaching out to more people.
So perhaps we, choose the risk to do all of this. And sometimes risks are very good. But this risk, right, the image that we have of ourselves, we are in complete crisis with regards to this. All of this, the Brazilian identity, right? A completely mixed people that is marvelous, and people are ashamed of this mixture, this misogyny in Brazil. And they feel inferior, right? The Brazilian person feels inferior to what in fact he is. So this very suffering, this image of suffering has to be shown. They have a much stronger image than us. We are very confused vis-a-vis all of this. So whether we're going to do it, if we're going to do it, we have to really go for this image that is ours, because this is everything that we have. I think I'm speaking here to people that study films, right? That are movie makers. Cinema has become so democratic. We carry it in our pockets, and we go out making movies all the time. So this is a possibility, an even greater possibility today of doing this. To buy, before you had to buy the film, and it was almost impossible to make movies with that amount of film, right? With that negative, right? Today, possibilities have increased, so you can risk more to obtain the image you want. So we're going to speed up a process of demand, to be more demanding with regards to everything we do, to want to do better, so that we can spend, and we're going to spend less here too by doing this. The possibilities we have today are much greater than we had. And there are other forms of movie will emerge. It's a mixture of several things, even as already happens in cinema, mixing fiction with reality, because reality has become such a fiction. It's not going to be very difficult for us to get there, right, through the movies, through the cinema. But what is really rich is to know there are so many people wanting to make movies. So when one disappears, 20 appears wanting to make movies, and this is just beautiful. Walter, excuse me. We are. Do you think we should open for questions, because we are very late here? Otherwise, we should open for questions. Otherwise, I'm going to start crying here if we don't open for questions. Well, I didn't bring any handkerchief with me, so please ask your questions. At least 5 minutes we have for questions. So now I'm going to give to the audience, the floor to the audience. If you have a question, please. So I'll begin here. Good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, it's such a pleasure, huge happiness to see such an incredible panel of people, so enthusiastic, creative, and thinking. I am Valéria. I work on the project Let's Go to the Movies in Brasília, which is an audiovisual school for students from very vulnerable areas. My question, how do I take this panel to this You Can, right? Which was an exchange of words, with a podcast. You Can, to show our students, right, that they can whatever they want. And the purpose of the project is audiovisual as a tool, so that they can broaden and extend their voices. So it has everything to do with what César said, right? César said what cinema does and with whom they do it. And it also complements with everything you said. It's an amplification of the voices of everybody. And this is my question question. I want to
Philip
take all
Coder
of you, including
você
Philip,
podcast do projeto. Como que eu
Philip
faço?
Coder
Essa é a pergunta.
to this project.
Muito
You know, so how
obrigada.
do I
Então,
do this?
prazer
This is my
esse-
question.
esse-
It is a
esse
pleasure
diálogo.
to have this dialogue with
É uma
you.
pergunta para a mesa, né?
I think this is a question for the panel as a whole, right?
Detalhe é que a mesa vai ficar
The
gravada.
detail that everything is recorded here,
Vai ficar
right?
no YouTube depois.
So
da ABC.
it's going to be in the YouTube too.
Valéria,
Valéria,
essas mesas todas são
These
transmitidas ao vivo.
panels
Depois elas ficam
are all
disponibilizadas
live
no
and they
canal
are
da
available
ABC.
in
Tá?
the
Então, entrando no site
ABC
da
channel
ABC,
in
Semana
the
ABC
YouTube.
2023,
So you go
clicou,
to
todas as mesas da
ABC
semana estarão lá.
Week, all the
Agora a gente
panels
transmitindo ao
of the
vivo
week will be
para o
there.
canal da ABC
Now
e
we're
também
transmitting
pro
live to the
SBC Play,
ABC
para quem estiver
channel
ouvindo.
and to
Mas ela fica lá
SBC
depois da
Play,
reserva.
and then it remains there forever.
Bom, aí
Okay.
vai com a
And
mesa. Se a
now,
mesa quiser fazer uma fala
If
específica, aí
the
também.
panel wants to say something specifically,
Quem é a próxima?
Sim, só boa tarde a todos os presentes, boa tarde à mesa.
good afternoon,
Eu queria fazer uma
everybody.
pergunta que
I
era
would like to
inicialmente
ask a
direcionada ao
question
Cumã, mas eu acho que cabe à mesa toda
Kuikuman,
responder.
but I think the
Participando
whole
desse
panel can
debate
answer.
do princípio
Having
de
participated
descentralização,
on this debate,
quando
you know,
vindo de
the
uma participação
principle
não
of
acadêmica,
decentralization,
vindo
non-academic,
especialização pós, depois
right?
disso, como que a mesa enxerga
So how does
esse
this
trabalho de
panel see
democratização
this
de acesso às
democratization
produções
work
de menor
of
porte, que não
access
tem esse
to
alcance
smaller
grande
production
nacional,
that doesn't have this
vivendo num país
reach
que a gente tem
where we live in
boa
a
parte das
country
produções
where most
restritas
of the
ao polo
productions
sudeste aqui,
are very
e
restricted
como
to the
fazer isso chegar,
southeast.
como que as
And so
produtoras,
how
como
do
que
we
vocês
have
como
the
organização,
production
como professores,
companies, you as
enxergam
teachers
possível fazer uma expansão maior do cinema nacional de maneira
organizations
democrática, de
allowed
fato,
to
além também só
democratize this,
da
to go
questão
beyond
para a formação
to the rest
extra-acadêmica
of
de
Brazil, you're right.
manter não só a
So not
linguagem
only
viva
academic,
das
but
culturas,
extra
como o documentário,
academic, not only have the life,
mas no modo
the
geral, de
language,
como
in
essa
general,
universalização
the
do setor
universalization
audiovisual
of the
pode chegar e expandir
audiovisual
realmente de
sector, how
maneira
it can
além de políticas
expand,
públicas.
going beyond public policies.
Acho que já vale a gente fazer mais uma pergunta.
One more question.
Mais duas perguntas.
Ok.
Another two
Posso falar aqui?
questions.
Super rápido, até responder
Very
a
quickly.
pergunta do
Just
César,
to
né, o que é
answer
o
Cesar's
CEAP,
question, what
que é
CEAP
muitos alunos que
is,
estão aqui, né? A
many
gente é do
students
Centro
here,
Educacional
we are
Assistencial
from the
Profissionalizante, que é uma
professional
escola de uma ONG 100%
education
gratuita, e a gente abriu um
center.
curso
It is
técnico.
100%
Inclusive, estamos com uma
free
turma
and
aqui, duas
GA.
turmas aqui,
We
a gente
have a
ainda não tem uma
technical
turma formada,
course.
estamos
We have
iniciando.
two groups.
E
We're
eu queria trazer um
setting up the
questionamento aqui
groups,
que
and I
é,
have a
assim,
question.
trazer o audiovisual para a
To
periferia
have the
tem dois
audiovisual
problemas
in the
principais. Um deles é o
periphery,
acesso,
there are
porque
two
não é caro fazer
problems.
cinema.
One is
É difícil fazer cinema, você
access.
precisa de
It
câmeras,
is difficult
equipamento,
to
precisa de
make
formação.
movies. I
Geralmente
need
você precisa ali de uma
equipment,
estrutura.
formation
E
and
por outro lado
training.
é
You
o
need the
interesse
structure.
artístico,
And then the
né?
artistic
Porque muitas vezes a
interest.
cultura chegou muito
Oftentimes
depois em alguns
culture
lugares e esse interesse artístico ele
reaches
vai
other
atrofiando.
places. And this
Teve uma pesquisa nessa ONG que é do
artistic
Instituto
interest
Ayrton
becomes
e mostrou lá
kinds
que
of
havia
atrophies itself.
200%
There was
a menos de interesse artístico em relação a outras áreas ali do ensino. Né? Então,
less
realmente, assim,
artistic
até numa
interest than in
aula
other
indígena
areas.
ou até com países lá fora, né, na região da África.
So even in
Uma coisa é
countries
você ter o
abroad,
acesso, outra coisa é
one
também
thing
ter o
is to have
interesse e às vezes
access
esse
and the
interesse está um
other is
pouco se
interest.
esvaindo.
And
Né? Então,
sometimes
eu queria
this
talvez uma
interest
fala, não sei,
sort
da
of
mesa, quem
fades.
se
And
sentir
I'd
para
like
falar,
to
como é que
have you
você
tell me,
cultiva,
how do you
desperta, incentiva esse interesse
cultivate,
artístico para
awaken this
essas regiões que
artistic
também precisam
interest
fazer cinema.
in these regions that also need to make movies? That's my question.
Vamos abrir mais uma pergunta direto? Alguém quer responder essa daí?
Would anybody like to answer this question?
Não? Ele fez um questionamento, infelizmente. Bom, gente, infelizmente é o
So,
seguinte, a gente
unfortunately,
tem tempo para mais uma pergunta.
we have
Se
time
alguém
for
quiser
only one
responder
more
o questionamento
question.
do companheiro ali, estamos aqui.
So,
Faz a última, daí...
one last question, and then...
Tá bom. Então, me desculpem,
I'm
eu sei que está
sorry,
ótimo, está todo
everybody.
mundo
I know
falando que
this
a
is
mesa foi
great.
excelente, vocês estão de
Everybody's
parabéns.
saying this
Mas
panel
não
was
dá,
just
gente. Isso vai
excellent, but
continuar.
you
Ano que
ought
vem
to
tem
be
Semana ABC de novo,
congratulated.
está saindo ali, não pode.
So,
Semana
we
ABC de
got,
novo.
once again, the ABC
Então,
Week,
a gente vai continuar
we will
com isso,
continue.
Tá bom? Então, nós temos
with
mais
the
uma
next
pergunta e
panels.
depois
One more
vamos
question,
responder as
and
duas, tá bom?
then questions will be
Boa
answered.
tarde
Good
a todos.
afternoon to everybody.
Meu nome é Tutu.
My name is Tutu.
Hoje estou muito
And
contente
today
que
I'm
estou
very
aqui.
happy to be here.
Meu português eu vou falar devagar para
I'm
todo
going to
mundo.
speak very slowly
o que
so
eu
that
quero
everybody
falar.
can understand what I want to
Sou aluno do
say.
Senac La
I am
Pacifion.
a student
Meus
from
professores
SINAC,
aqui.
and my teachers
E
are
a
here.
apresentação de hoje para mim
Today's
foi muito
presentation
legal,
was just
porque
wonderful
sempre, todos os
because
dias,
every
eu
day
passo no site do ABC.
I go
pra ver
through
se
the
tem
ABC
E o
site to
professor
see if
da
there are
última que
news.
falou,
And the
motivou
last
também
professor
a
that
gente.
say,
E as provocações também.
and all the provocations
Para mim
here,
é muito, estou muito
for me,
alegria.
I am very happy
Mas
to be here.
minha preocupação
But my
é
concern
tem muitos cursos
is that there are
que eu
many courses
pesquisei
that I
só aqui
researched,
no ABC. Tem,
specifically,
mas é
only
muito
here in
caro.
ABC, they have a lot
Como
of
o
courses,
professor
but they're
falou,
very expensive.
tem que aprender,
As the
sabe,
professor
cada
said,
dia.
you have to learn.
Mas esses cursos que são muito caros, como
But
a
these
gente
very
vai
expensive
ter
courses, how
acesso
can we have access
para aprender com
to
nossos
these courses to
professores
learn with our
que estão
teachers
aqui?
who are
Será
here?
que a ABC pode fazer alguma
Can
coisa
ABC do
para
something
nós?
for
Tanto
us
tem
here?
essa ABC semanal
You have
de
this ABC
2023,
Week
ano que vem.
2023,
Além
and
disso,
next year,
eu acho
also,
que muita gente talvez
many
vou
people,
esperar só até ano que vem. Por causa
they have to wait till next
do
year
dinheiro, porque é muito
because of
caríssimo.
money, because these courses are
Podemos
very, very
fazer alguma
expensive.
coisa
What can
pra
you
gente,
do
nós,
for us here?
iniciantes? Muito obrigado.
For us beginners here. Thank you very, very much.
Então, para quem... Acho que o César, né? O César vai responder.
César is going to take the question.
Então, em relação à tua
As
colocação,
regards your
eu
question,
tenho a rede Kino, que é uma rede de
there is
cinemação.
a network
Você pode ter
of
acesso
movie
a
making and
muitos livros,
education.
publicações
This
que
network
falam
gives
diretamente
access
sobre
to many books
metodologias,
that
efeitos,
talks
pesquisas
specifically about
desse lugar
research
do
methodologies
cinema com não profissionais.
and the place
Eu não
of
falei não
movies
profissionais, mas eu
for
acho que é um ponto
non-professionals.
importante. Eu acho que
I believe this
essa
is an important
presença do
point.
cinema
The presence
nesses lugares, na
of
escola, a prisão,
movies
etc.,
in those
ela,
places,
como ela não tá
schools and
formando profissionais,
penitentiaries,
eu acho que a
prisons,
gente
because
pode
they are
também,
not training
botar esse
professionals.
paradigma de
I
cabeça
believe
pra
we
baixo.
can
A ideia de que eu
upend
preciso
this
público, a
paradigm. The
ideia de
idea
que eu
that I
vou-
need
isso é pra determinado
an audience.
tipo de
This
cinema.
is for
O que
a
a gente tá
specific
dizendo
kind
que
of
acontece,
movies.
nos
What
últimos, sei lá, 20,
we have
30
seen
anos no
happening in
mundo
the past
é que o cinema
20,
passa a
30 years in the
ocupar
world
um
is
lugar,
that
por
movie
exemplo,
making
quando
is
você
now
escreve uma poesia com seus amigos, você não tá
occupying
esperando
an
público.
important
Quando você escreve
space.
uma
When you
carta de
write
amor, você não tá
the
esperando
poem
público, uma
to
pessoa
your
só,
family
né?
members, you're not
Quando- ou, às
expecting
vezes,
audience.
trisal também,
When
pode
you
ser.
write music, you're not
Quando você
expecting
monta um
audience.
quebra-cabeça,
When
você não tá
you
esperando
set up
público. Quando você faz terapia, é para um. O cinema é isso.
do a
O
crossword
cinema,
puzzle
desse lugar do não
or set up
profissional,
a
que pode
puzzle,
ser
you're not
feito pelo
expecting
estudante de química, pode ser
applause.
feito pelo estudante de,
This
sei lá,
kind
de
of
qualquer
movies can be
coisa,
done
né?
by
Ele é
any
modo de
person.
fazer política,
It
um
is a
modo
way
de
to
inventar
do
a si, é um modo de
politics,
entrar,
the way
numa
to
dimensão ético-criativa política na relação com a
enter
realidade.
in an ethical
Isso é de pra
political
Isso não precisa
dimension
um
of reality.
Mercedes-Benz com
This
essas
is
câmeras
one by one.
maravilhosas que a gente vê
It does
fora,
not
entende?
require wonderful and expensive cameras. So I just wanted to invert this logic. This network that I just mentioned, it is a good place to see what is taking place in this area. We have now a question from that guy over there about decentralization.
Pode sim, vai.
This process of democratization, and I mentioned this during my speech, was important in different moments of the history of Brazil. I believe today we have this important tool, which is a cell phone. I am a kind of a cinema guerrilla girl, and I do movies myself, just my own, on my own. I believe that what Cesar mentioned is really important. Making movies or audiovisual not mandatorily has to have an audience. For example, with indigenous movies, there's this thing about watching what is done, and they watch what they do, what they make. There's this thing about you making something for your community. Audiovisual is like a video letter. That is, you communicate with somebody who is far away, who is not born yet or has already died, with a language called video letter. I firmly believe in movies with little resources, not in the sense of being a lesser cinema, but in the sense that subverts rules and that reinvents itself. I believe that when we have this wish, like I saw in Takuman was bitten by cinema. He didn't speak a word of Portuguese, but he really felt this urge to create his own movies. I believe when something like this happens, this urge happens, you need to begin experimenting. Using anything that you have around you. It is something that can be done by using any kind of device. Everybody has cell phones today. So, in these experiences where we use audiovisual as a process, as he said, it goes much beyond the final product. It is the process itself that is life-changing. This idea of a cine guerrilla makes all sense because it allows us to experiment, to let loose our imagination. In other words, do a lot of things that perhaps can take us to a new future experience under new conditions. But as sum up, I firmly believe in this. Well, we have several questions to be answered, but unfortunately we cannot. We have to abide by our contract. I'd like to thank Daniela, Mario, Felipe Cordet, and Takuman, and my friend Walter Lima Jr. Thank you all for being here today with us.
Como prometido, a gente vai fazer dois sorteios rapidinho. Eu preciso falar o seguinte: a próxima mesa, quando vocês saírem, já podem. Quem não pegou pode tentar. Não vai conseguir porque está cheio. Vocês podem ver na outra sala, tem uma outra sala com 110 lugares, só que vocês vão ver na tela, mas está lá, e é tudo que passa aqui, passa lá. Só uma resposta também para o nosso amigo lá de trás, obrigado pela pergunta. A ABC sempre teve aberto ao mundo acadêmico, entendeu? A gente faz tudo que a gente consegue fazer. A ABC não é... Nunca se fechou a troca acadêmica. Tanto é que nós temos sócios que são estudantes, entendeu? Na verdade, a ABC sempre promoveu, a gente participa de workshops, alguns a gente sempre faz e faz esse evento que é aberto a todos. A gente tem que fazer o que a gente consegue fazer como uma instituição de profissionais. Tá? A gente, na verdade, não é uma escola.
We are not a school.
É uma associação
We are an
de profissionais de cinema que tem apoio de algumas escolas,
professionals that have the support of some schools, the ABC courses, and who are here to sponsor us. But we've always been open to exchange information with academia.
Também isso, quer dizer, existem os cursos ABC de cinema que tem... a gente não pode confundir as duas coisas, são duas coisas completamente diferentes. São coisas completamente separadas. O curso ABC... Peraí, Mustafa, a gente está... Senão as pessoas depois não vão entender nada. Você quer falar, eu te passo a palavra. Porque só o presidente da ABC. Melhor do que eu para responder isso.
I am the president of the ABC, so I am the best person to answer this. It's just to say, these are two separate things, but there are grants for the ABC courses. It is not only for people that have money.
Exatamente, quer dizer, os cursos ABC
têm esse tipo
de atitude que você estava cobrando, entendeu? Agora, eu sinceramente eu não sei te dizer como é que é, depois você pode procurar. Outra coisa que eu queria dizer, essas pessoas todas maravilhosas vão estar, vocês podem continuar conversando com elas, todas elas estarão aqui durante algum certo tempo, tá bom? Vamos logo, porque senão eu não consigo fazer o resto da semana. A primeira sorteio, é rapidinho o sorteio, ele vai ser randômico, é uma lembrança da Next.
up on the